Good evening and welcome to another edition of What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse and today is Thursday, May 19th, 2022. Next week, which will be the 26th, Thursday 26th, I'll be out of town and I won't be pre-recording a program. So after this evening, we'll see each other again on Thursday, June 2nd, at the normal time of 5:45. And this cap, I'm just going to mention it has the letters JG. Oh, I'm sorry. And this is Oliver. Oliver, who is going to spell me in the reading. Oliver, look over there at the camera. That's it. Come on. He was doing very well before we went on the air. That's good. That's good. Very good, Oliver. See, this way we can see each other. And so this is Oliver. If you're interested, he's an American Eskimo. He's a miniature, even though he's 20 pounds, about 4 years old. And his breed originally came from Germany. It was called Spitz. And Oliver's breed were used in circus. Circuses to perform with clowns and animals, riding on the backs of horses, doing tricks, doing a routine with clowns, that sort of thing in Germany in the 19th and early 20th century. These dogs are very agile. They have 4 springs for legs. And they're very sweet disposition, separation anxiety whenever you leave your vehicle, even if it's just to pump gas. But other than that, very even-tempered. Okay, so back to Jericho Green. That's what the letters JG stand for. And Carla gave me this cap as a present. For a couple of years, I was following Jericho Green on his podcast from his car while he was driving on YouTube. And he still gives podcasts, but not from his car. He actually retired from where he worked. And so he has more than the lunch hour he was using to do his podcasts, and has his own studio. A very interesting perspective. He's a father. I believe he has a son and a daughter. Young children, early elementary, and his wife is a special education teacher. They live near Watsonville or Gilroy. Gilroy is the garlic capital of the world, or at least it calls itself that. And Gilroy is near Salinas, John Steinbeck country, in around just east of San Jose. So San Jose is about 100 miles south of San Francisco, and Salinas, Watsonville area, Gilroy are more towards the interior. Very agricultural. A lot of people from Central America and Mexico work in the agriculture industry there. And the vibe is much different than the vibe along the coast, whether you're in the Southland around Los Angeles or further north in the San Francisco, I forget the name of the city, Redding. There's another city further up the coast that I'm blanking, but anyway, the northern coast. Very different vibe, different politics. And it's a very big state, very diverse, and California's often been called the petri dish of the United States as far as social changes and new ideas and new approaches to living. Let's put it that way. So we have been reading, talk about different approach to living and governing. 1984 from George Orwell. He wrote this in 1947, 48. It was published in 49. And he died a year later in 1950. He was from England. He spent time in India. He worked in the Home Guard during World War II. My take from reading what he's written in 1984 is he had a very good knowledge of the government in play in the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin and in Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. And he also had an idea about our own intelligence services. The CIA, if you may remember, was formed by President Harry Truman in 1947. And so there's a lot of the CIA, there's a lot of the intelligence services of Britain, former Nazi Germany, and the former Soviet Union in this book. So we are going to pick up the scene where Winston Smith, the main protagonist who works in the Ministry of Truth, we would call it the Ministry of Disinformation under the Department of Homeland Security, the Ministry of Truth, and he's at the canteen, which is a cafeteria where they have lunch, and he's going to meet a couple of co-workers. And the conversation, what they're working on, I think is worth sharing. In the low-ceiling canteen, deep underground, the lunch line jerked slowly forward. The room was already very full and deafeningly noisy. From the grill at the counter, the steam of stew came pouring forth, with sour metallic smell which did not quite overcome the fumes of Victory Gin. Victory Gin, if you remember, is the one alcoholic beverage that people of the outer party are allowed to drink. If you're a prole or from the proletariat outside the party, then you have beer. On the far side of the room, there was a small bar, a mere hole in the wall, where gin could be bought at 10 cents per nip. "Just the man I was looking for," said a voice at Winston's back. He turned around. It was his friend Syme, who worked in the research department. Perhaps friend was not exactly the right word. You did not have friends nowadays. You had comrades. But there were some comrades whose society was pleasanter than that of others. Sim was a philologist, a specialist in newspeak. Indeed, he was one of the enormous team of experts now engaged in compiling the 11th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. He was a tiny creature, smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large protruding eyes, at once mournful and derisive, which seemed to search your face closely while he was speaking to you. "I wanted to ask you whether you got any razor blades," he said. "Not a one," said Winston with a sort of guilty haste. "I've tried all over the place. They don't exist any longer." Everyone kept asking you for razor blades. Actually, he had 2 unused ones which he was hoarding up. There had been a famine of them for months past. At any given moment, there was some necessary article which the party shops were unable to supply. I imagine it. Sometimes it's toilet paper. Baby formula? Your eyes open. Sometimes it was buttons, sometimes it was darning wool, sometimes it was shoelaces. At present, it was razor blades. You could only get hold of them, if at all, by scrounging more or less on the free market. "I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks," he added, untruthfully. The line gave another jerk forward. As they halted, he turned and faced Syme again. Each of them took a greasy metal tray from a pile at the edge of the counter. Did you go and see the prisoners hanged yesterday? Said Syme. I was working, said Winston indifferently. I shall see it on the flicks, I suppose. Ah, very inadequate substitute, said Syme. His mocking eyes roved over Winston's face. I know you, the eyes seemed to say. I see through you. I know very well why you didn't go to see those prisoners hanged. In an intellectual way, Syme was poisonously orthodox. He would talk with a disagreeable, gloating satisfaction of helicopter raids on enemy villages, the trials and confessions of thought criminals, the executions in the cellars of the Ministry of Love, and talking to him was largely a matter of getting him away from such subjects and entangling him, if possible, in the technicalities of newspeak, on which he was authoritative and interesting. Winston turned his head a little aside to avoid the scrutiny of the large, dark eyes. It was a good hanging, said Syme. I think it spoils it when they tie their feet together. I like to see them kicking, and above all, at the end, the tongue sticking right out, and blue, a quite bright blue. That's the detail that always appeals to me. Next, please, yelled the white-aproned prole with the ladle. Winston and Syme pushed their trays along the grill, beneath the grill. Onto each was dumped swiftly the regulation lunch, a metal pancake of pinkish-gray stew. Not pancake, it's a pan. A hunk of bread, a cube of cheese, a mug of milkless Victory coffee, and one saccharin tablet to sweeten it. There's a table over there under that telescreen, said Syme. Let's pick up a gin on the way. The gin was served out to them in handless china mugs. They threaded, we're getting it. They threaded their way across the crowded room and unpacked their trays onto the metal-topped table, on one corner of which someone had left a pool of stew, a filthy liquid mess that had the appearance of vomit. Winston took up his mug of gin, paused for an instant to collect his nerve, and gulped the oil-tasting stuff down. When he had winked the tears out of his eyes, he suddenly discovered that he was hungry. He began swallowing spoonfuls of the stew, which, in among its general sloppiness, had cubes of spongy, pinkish stuff, which was probably a preparation of meat. Neither of them spoke again until they had emptied their plates. From the table at Winston's left, a little behind his back, someone was talking rapidly and continuously, a harsh gabble, almost like the quacking of a duck, which pierced the general uproar of the room. "How is the dictionary getting on?" said Winston, raising his voice to overcome the noise. "Slowly," said Syme. "I'm on the adjectives. It's fascinating." He had brightened up immediately at the mention of newspeak. He pushed his plate aside, took up his hunk of bread, and in one delicate hand and his cheese in the other, leaned across the table so as to be able to speak without shouting. "The 11th edition is the definitive edition," he said. "We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else. When we've finished with that, people like you will have to learn it all over again. You think, I dare say, that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them, every day. Canceling. We're cutting the language down to the bone. The 11th edition won't contain a single word that will be obsolete before the year 2050. He bit hungrily into his bread and swallowed a couple of mouthfuls, then continued speaking, with a sort of pedant's passion. His thin, dark face had become animated. His eyes had lost their mocking expression and grown almost dreamy. It's a beautiful thing, you know, the destruction of words. Of course, the great wastage is in the verbs and the adjectives, but there are hundreds of nouns that we can get rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms, but there are also antonyms. After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other word? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? Ungood will do just as well. Better because it's an exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, what sense is there in having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent and splendid, and all the rest of them? Plus good covers the meaning. Or double plus good, if you want something stronger still. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there'll be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words. In reality, only 1 word. Don't you see the beauty of this, Winston? It was Big Brother's idea originally, of course. He added as an afterthought. A sort of vapid eagerness flitted across Winston's face at the mention of Big Brother. Nevertheless, Syme immediately detected a certain lack of enthusiasm. You haven't a real appreciation of Newspeak, Winston, he said almost sadly. Even when you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. I've read some of those pieces that you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. In your heart, you'd prefer to stick to old speak, with all its vagueness and its useless shades of meaning. You don't grasp the beauty of the destruction of words. Do you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year? I wonder if you could say that currently about the usage of American English. Winston did not know that, of course. He smiled sympathetically, he hoped, not trusting himself to speak. Syme bit off another fragment of the dark-colored bread, chewed it briefly, and went on. Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly 1 word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Already in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point. But the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, fewer and fewer words. You'd like that, wouldn't you, Oliver? You could understand more. Fewer and fewer words. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self-discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need even for that. The revolution will be complete when the language is perfect. Newspeak. Actually, I'm wrong. new speak. There's only one S. Newspeak is Ingsoc, and Ingsoc is Newspeak, he added with a sort of mystical satisfaction. Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation as we are having now? Well, maybe sooner than 2050, with today's trends, huh? Except, began Winston doubtfully, and then stopped. It had been on the tip of his tongue to say, except the proles, or the proletariat, the ones that are outside the inner and outer party. But he checked himself, not feeling fully certain that this remark was not in some way unorthodox. Syme, however, had guessed what he was about to say. Sorry I didn't bring your little jar with water. Ah, you like that sound? That's CO2. And plants need CO2, although some people don't realize that. They'd rather there be less CO2. Okay, so, has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation as we are having now? Except, began Winston doubtfully, and then he stopped. It had been on his tip of his tongue to say, except the proles, but he checked himself, not feeling certain that this remark was not in some way unorthodox. Syme, however, had guessed what he was about to say. The proles are not human beings, he said carelessly. This is Syme. By 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of old speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, Patterson, who else have I read? They'll exist only in newspeak versions, not merely changed into something different, but actually changed into something contradictory of what they used to be. Even the language of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like "freedom is slavery" when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. One of these days, thought Winston with sudden deep conviction, Syme will be vaporized. He is too intelligent. He sees too clearly and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. One day he will disappear. It is written in his face. Well, I think we'll end right there for today. The scene goes on. Oh, here comes Parson. Syme looked up. Here comes Parsons. Now, Parsons' wife was the one, the neighbor of Winston, who came down the hall and asked him to unplug the sink. Parsons, the husband, was not there. And Parsons and his wife have two lovely children. Something in the tone of his voice seemed to add, "that bloody fool." Parsons, Winston's fellow tenant at Victory Mansions, was in fact threading his way across the room. A tubby, middle-sized man with fair hair and a frog-like face. You have a furry face, Oliver. This man has a frog-like face. At 35, he was already putting on rolls of fat at his neck and waistline, but his movements were brisk and boyish. His whole appearance was that of a little boy grown large. So much so that although he was wearing the regulation overalls, it was almost impossible not to think of him as being dressed in the blue shorts, gray shirt, and red neckerchief of the Spies. Spies is a youth organization. In visualizing him, one saw always a picture of dimpled knees and sleeves rolled back from pudgy forearms. Parsons did indeed invariably revert to shorts when a community hike or any other physical activity gave him an excuse for doing so. He greeted them both with a cheery hello, hello, and sat down at the table, giving off an intense smell of sweat. Beads of moisture stood out all over his pink face. His powers of sweating were extraordinary. He was the superhero of sweat. At the community center, you could always tell when he had been playing table tennis by the dampness of the bat handle. Syme had produced a strip of paper on which there were a long column of words and was studying it with an ink pencil between his fingers. "Look at him working away in the lunch hour," said Parsons, nudging Winston. "Keenness, huh? That's what you've got there, old boy. Something a bit too brainy for me, I suspect. Smith, old boy, I'll tell you why I'm chasing you. It's that sub you forgot to give me." "Which sub is that?" said Winston, automatically feeling for money. About a quarter of one's salary had to be earmarked for voluntary subscriptions, which were so numerous that it was difficult to keep track of them. Yeah, I remember working in a unionized location. I was in a union and being hit up for money for this or that cause. That's funny. This subscription is for Hate Week. You know, the House by House Fund. I'm treasurer for our block. We're making an all-out effort, going to put on a tremendous show. I tell you, it won't be my fault if Old Victory Mansions doesn't have the biggest outfit of flags in the whole street. $2 you promised me. Winston found and handed over 2 creased and filthy notes, which Parsons entered in a small notebook in the neat handwriting of the illiterate. "By the way, old boy," he said, "I hear that little beggar of mine let fly at you with his slingshot yesterday. I gave him a good dressing down for that. In fact, I told him I'll take the slingshot away if he does it again." "I think he was a little upset for not going to the execution," said Winston. "Ah, well, what I mean to say is shows that right spirit, doesn't it? Mischievous little beggars they are, both of them. But talk about keenness. All they think about is the spies, the war, etc. You know what that little girl of mine did last Saturday? With her troop, she was on a hike out Berkhamsted Way. She got 2 other girls to go with her, slipped off from the hike, and spent the whole afternoon following a strange man. They kept on his tail for 2 hours, right through the woods, and then when they got into Amersham, handed him over to the patrols. "What did they do that for?" said Winston, somewhat taken aback. Parsons went on triumphantly. "My kid made sure he was some kind of enemy agent. Might have been dropped by parachute, for instance. But here's the point, old boy. What do you think put her on to him in the first place? She spotted he was wearing a funny kind of shoes. Said she'd never seen anyone wearing shoes like that before. So the chances were he was a foreigner. Pretty smart for a nipper of 7, huh? What happened to the man, said Winston. Ah, that I couldn't say, of course. But I wouldn't be altogether surprised if Parsons made the motion of aiming a rifle and clicked his tongue for the explosion. Good, said Syme abstractedly, without looking up from his strip of paper. Of course, we can't afford to take chances, agreed Winston dutifully. What I mean to say is, there is a war on, said Parsons. As though in confirmation of this, a trumpet call floated from the telescreen just above their heads. However, it was not the proclamation of a military victory this time, but nearly an announcement from the Ministry of Plenty. Comrades, cried an eager voice, youthful voice. Attention, comrades, we have glorious news for you. We have won the battle for production. Returns now completed of the output of all classes of consumption goods show that the standard of living has risen by no less than 20% over the past year. All of Oceania this morning, there were irrepressible, spontaneous demonstrations when workers marched out of factories and offices and paraded through the streets with banners voicing their gratitude to Big Brother for the new, happy life which his wise leadership has bestowed upon us. Here are some of the completed figures. Foodstuffs. The phrase, our happy new life, recurred several times. It had been a favorite of late with the Ministry of Plenty. Parsons, his attention caught by the trumpet call, sat listening with a sort of gaping solemnity, a sort of edified boredom. He could not follow the figures, but he was aware that they were in some way a cause for satisfaction. He had lugged out a huge and filthy pipe which was already half filled with charred tobacco. With the tobacco ration at 100 grams a week, it was seldom possible to fill a pipe up to the top. Winston was smoking a Victory cigarette, which he held carefully horizontal. The new ration did not start till tomorrow, and he had only 4 cigarettes left. For the moment, he had shut his ears to the remoter noises and was listening to the stuff that streamed out of the telescreen. Streamed out of the telescreen. It appeared that there had even been demonstrations to thank Big Brother for raising the chocolate ration to 20 grams a week. And only yesterday, he reflected, it had been announced that the ration was to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that they could swallow that after only 24 hours? You answer that. Parsons swallowed it easily with the stupidity of an animal. The eyeless creature at the other table swallowed it fanatically, passionately, with a furious desire to track down, denounce, and vaporize anyone who would suggest that last week the ration had been 30 grams. Syme, too, in some more complex way involving doublethink. Syme swallowed it. Was he, Winston, then alone in his possession of memory? Was Winston then alone in the possession of memory, of something that he learned 24 hours ago, the ration being 30 grams of chocolate per week? And I think we'll stop there. We are not going to go through the entire book, but I thought some scenes are very demonstrative as to where I believe Orwell wanted to go in telling this story of fiction, which some of us may believe is resembling in parallel ways what we're experiencing today on a certain level. So again, next week, Oliver and I will be out of town, We will not be pre-recording. No, we won't. We won't be pre-recording a program. No, we won't. We will be back on June 2nd, which is a Thursday. I want to wish everybody a good Memorial Day weekend. It's not this weekend, it's next weekend, but we won't see you. And Orwell talks about endless wars between three superpowers in 1984, and that the two gang up on the third, and then the third and one of the two gang up on the other one, so that it's a constant shifting of war between the three superpowers. We have three superpowers by coincidence, and we seem to be going through third-party wars on sometimes for 20 years, like in Afghanistan. And since it's Memorial Day, I just want to remind everybody what the toll was from our experience of 20 years in Afghanistan, which ended with the Biden administration pulling out last August. During the 20 years, we lost 2,430 American servicemen and women. These are Americans. 1,645 servicemen came back as amputees, having a leg or an arm removed, generally from a roadside bomb explosion. And over 22,000 during these 20 years were wounded. And so I mention this because I doubt very much if a memorial will ever be erected for their sacrifice, since nothing changed through their sacrifice. The country has gone back to the way to local control through the Taliban, which is what happened in the late 90s after the Russians pulled out. And they're back in control now after the Americans pulled out. So the theme of a constant war, I believe, has parallels with today. And we need to remember the cost of these wars and the fact that the people that send our young people out to war seldom have served a day in the military themselves. So I hope you think of the people we have lost overseas through ill-advised and poorly planned strategies, political strategies, military strategies, and that these wars will continue until more of us ask or demand accountability from our representatives and from our presidents. The 20 years spans the presidencies of four people: Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. And I believe their administrations all bear responsibility for the loss, the waste of loss of life, and the fact that we left the country pretty much as we found it 20 years earlier. And we better damn well think before we enter into another conflict. Who is profiting from these conflicts? So, God bless, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Say bye-bye, Oliver. Over there. There's the camera. Hello.